This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast.
Over here! The bodies everywhere!
Hello and welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz. Gil will be with us shortly. As always, before we start digging up more bodies, if there's a way to like this content via a button, please hit it. It really does matter. And if you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing. When I say things are going on, that's an understatement. For instance, Gil and I are about to take out a brand new 1-hour streaming series to the marketplace. It's horror and very black comedy, blended together in a tasty concoction about flesh-eating ghouls called Are You Afraid?
Flesh-eating ghouls. For a long time, we humans have been deeply afraid of vampires and zombies.
Sin for paramedics.
Fair enough, vampires and zombies are scary. But neither vampires nor zombies
Are real.
Flesh-eating ghouls, on the other hand, are real. They've been living in our shadow for thousands of years, hunting us, feasting on us, treating us
Like food.
But some ghouls are tired of living in the shadow of their food. Those ghouls have decided it's time to leave the shadow.
And put us in our place where we belong.
On the menu.
It's an eat or be eaten world.
Flavored by fear, filled with the monster we should have been afraid of all along. Flesh-eating ghoul. Are you afraid?
Better be.
Coming soon.
Stories are a lot like bodies, especially if you're the one who buried them. Just like with a body, you can bury a story. Sometimes in time, you forget about them. Meanwhile, there they sit. But whereas bodies rot while buried, stories often gain additional perspective, nuance, and dare I say, life. That's the idea behind this episode. Gil and I both have buried bodies, stories we haven't told each other yet. Until now.
I'm actually looking forward to learning something.
Well, I don't know if you'll learn anything. You'll hear some stuff. I don't know how much you'll learn. Why don't you kick us off with, I know some of the stuff that you wanted to talk about was your early days, how you got started in this, because, part of what's important to us is, there's a mentoring. We like to preach the gospel of stick-to-itiveness and follow your dream. And that's really how you started.
Yeah, I think I go way back, though, even before film, to theater in New York. And I wanted to produce theater. And I would walk around the streets of New York talking to squirrels. And they gave me some good advice. I actually said once, if I ever won an award, I would have to thank the squirrels of Central Park. But I was walking around, and Jack Gelber was a very well-known playwright. He wrote The Connection, which was the first successful play about drugs. And Jack was a good friend of mine. And we heard about this play called Kool-Aid that he had written. And so we wanted to produce it. And we decided at the Edinburgh Theater Festival. And so we needed $3,000 for plane tickets. And we met a woman who lived on Fifth Avenue and 72nd Street. I don't even know if she's still with us anymore. And she said, well, she would put up the $3,000, but she wanted to become a producer with us. And we said, yeah, fine. But if that meant coming to Edinburgh, that the $3,000 didn't include her plane ticket. And she said, fine, that's terrific. So we produced this play in Edinburgh. And while there, the press secretary for Mayor Lindsay in New York City at the time was a friend. And he said to us, there's a play running, in Edinburgh, it's their 24/7 theater during the festival. And they said, there's a play running that you guys should see. And we think you'd love it. And my partner, Jack Tempchin, who I met at Columbia University, we were in Edinburgh and we were playing our play, all kinds of crazy hours. And so we went to see this play at 9:00 in the morning in a garage. And we were one of 4 people in the audience.
Wow.
And we thought, oh boy, this is going to be tough. And it was described to us as very, very funny in 5 languages, none of which are English. but totally understandable to an English-speaking audience, which I had my doubts about. And I said, okay, well, we'll just watch it. And it starts, and I'm totally analyzing this in my head. So I'm Mr. Stonyface, I'm told. I'm thinking, oh, that's funny. That was even funnier. Oh, that's hilarious. But I'm not smiling and I'm not laughing. My partner is. And so we see the play and we go backstage afterwards, and the creators of the play go, Jack, you loved it, but Gil, why did you hate it so much? And I went, what are you talking about? I loved it. No, you hated it. I said, no, I didn't hate it at all. In fact, I want to give you a check to option the play, and we're going to bring you to New York in 8 weeks. And that's what we did. And so that was a play called El Grande de Coca-Cola. We first brought it into London, and it played at the Greenwich Theater, and then we brought it into New York. Well, when we get to New York, we come back to New York, we have the rights, we have, the people coming supposedly in 8 weeks. So we go to our lawyer, and our lawyer goes, how are you going to get them into the country? And I go, by plane. No. He says, how are you going to get them into the country? You can't just bring them in. They're actors, and they're not well-known actors. Equity, the Union for Stage Actors is not going to let them come into the country. And I go, well, what are you talking about? We gave him $1,000 option money. We got to get them into the country. So he goes, well, you could go down to immigration and make application and see what happens. So we did that, and we appeared, and they laughed at us. They said, these people are not distinguished artists. And I said, well, what makes a distinguished art? Who is a distinguished? Laurence Olivier is a distinguished artist. Someone very well known in theater or film from England. These people are, we never heard of them. And I said, so what makes a distinguished artist? And they said, well, people who are respectful in the industry, who say good things about them. So we rejected. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to lose the $1,000. So we go back and we sit with the lawyer, and I go, well, let me see what I can come up with. So I was at the time the director of grants at the New York State Council on the Arts, which was a state agency giving money to state arts groups all over New York State. Kitty Carlisle Hart was the chairman. So I went to Kitty Carlisle Hart and I said, I'm trying to bring this play in. Could I get a piece of paper on New York State Arts Council stationery signed by you, the chairman, saying that these people are, distinguished artists? And she says, yeah. So I get that letter. And then I knew Joe Papp and Bernie Gersten, who ran the Shakespeare Festival and ultimately Lincoln Center and Shakespeare in the Park. And I knew them from Columbia days, which I could talk about later. And I went to them and they said, sure, I'll give you a letter. So I got that letter. Then I went to Gordon Stewart, who was Mayor Lindsay's press secretary. And I said, Gordon, can I get a letter from you, from the mayor? And he said, I don't see why not. And so 24 hours after they rejected us, we went back to the immigration, and we had a letter from the city of New York. We had a letter from the state of New York. We had a letter from Joe Papp and Bernie Gersten. And I went to Jules Irving, who was running Lincoln Center, who I also knew. And I said, Jules, could I get you to write me a letter? And he said, oh, yeah, no problem. So within 24 hours, we go back with these 5 letters. And the arbitrator looks at it and he said, well, why didn't you bring these yesterday? And the real answer was, I didn't have them yesterday. But I said, oh, I didn't think I needed them. And he said, well, this makes all the difference in the world. Of course, with these people saying they're distinguished artists, oh, of course, we'll let them into the country. And that was my first entree into producing. How do you get things done when you're told you can't do them? And for you producers out there, or would-be producers, don't forget that. That's
do
something
do not take no for an answer.
I never forgot that. Never forgot that. And so we brought them into New York. We opened the theater at the Mercer Arts Center, which was way downtown, in the back side of the Broadway Central Hotel, which is an old dilapidated hotel. And the first day we get incredible reviews. New York Times, Clive Barnes, rave. New York Magazine, rave. The Post, good. The News, not bad. And overnight, there's a line outside this off-Broadway theater to buy tickets. Well, we thought, wow, we arrived. I'm a producer now, right? The funny part was I invited Joe and Bernie to the opening night, and they were the only people I really cared what they said. And so Joe afterwards takes me outside and he's smoking his cigar as he always did. And he said to me, so this is what I've been telling you about. Now you're a producer. Now you're like me. I felt like saying, yeah, I'm like you. I'm nowhere near you, Joe. But it was the beginning.
Still, that must have been incredibly validating.
It was incredibly validating, but I was still working at the New York State Council on the Arts because I had to make a living, right? And one day, about 6 months into the run, and we're sold out. Every week is sold out. And it's a small theater. And 6 months into the run, we're having a rehearsal on a Friday before the weekend, we have 6 shows. They're all sold out. And the stage manager calls me. It's the Arts Council. And it's odd. I knew he was rehearsing, and I go, that's odd for him to call me. And I take the phone call, and he goes, Gil, I got some really bad news for you. I don't know how to tell you this. I said, what happened? He said, the building fell down. I said, what do you mean the building fell down? What building fell down? The theater. I said, what do you mean the building fell down? It's the Broadway Central Hotel. He goes, yeah, it's been raining for the last 4 days and it fell down. I said, what do you mean it fell down? When you look into the theater, what do you see? And he says, I see Mercer Street. I said, how could you see Mercer Street? There's a wall there. And he goes, there's no more wall there. And I'm like, I'm coming right down. I'll be right down. So I run down there, and police are all over the place. The fire is all over the place, fire department. And, we're sold out, but there's no way we're going to be playing. So we have to give back all the money for the whole weekend. And I'm like, my career is gone. My career's up in smoke. And so I sat there and I was like, with my 2 partners, Jack Tempchin and John Vaccaro, saying, what are we going to do? And we said, well, there's this one section where somebody appears as Toulouse-Lautrec, and he wears shoes on his knees. And they were specially made, and they took 6 weeks to make them. And so I said, we got to get the shoes. We got to get the shoes out. Everything else we could probably replace, but we got to get the shoes. So we go to the police and we go, we got to get in there. And they go, no, the building is condemned. You can't, no one goes in or goes out. It's very dangerous in there. The whole rest of the building could collapse. And we go, no, we have to get the shoes out. So he looks at us and he goes, I'm gonna turn around and walk this way. And I don't really see what you're doing. I go, great. So the 3 of us go running into the theater with flashlights. We run into the place where we thought was our theater, go into the dressing room, and sure enough, one of us finds the shoes. We get the shoes, and the 3 of us come running out of the building because we're frightened to death the building's going to collapse on us. Stupid as we were to think we should go in the first place. So we get the shoes out, but now we have no place, we have no theater, we have nothing. So we go to our production manager on Friday night, and we're like, what are we going to do? We got to figure this out. And as we're sitting there, and I'm saying, well, why don't we go to the Plaza Hotel? They've got a beautiful little theater. It was called something 9, Studio 9 or something like that. And they used to play jazz in there. Great little space.
That was where I saw it.
Yeah. And so this literally happened. We're calling the Plaza Theater manager on one line. And as we're calling, they had these little buttons, and one light lights up. Well, now the other light was lighting up and the phone was ringing, and it was a phone call coming in. And so I said to the manager, why don't you take that phone call and then we'll call the Plaza Hotel. It was the Plaza Hotel calling us, asking us if our show was available. To which I said, well, it might be. How quickly can we talk to you? And they said, come over tonight. And we literally made the deal with the Plaza Hotel to open 1 week later, which was insane because we had to build the entire show, but we had the shoes. So we built the whole play. We opened a week later at the Plaza Hotel, and it ran for like 4 years there. And it was a much better location because we were now uptown. We were in the Broadway district, and we were a very she show now. Whereas before we were this off-Broadway sort of avant-garde little thing. But another thing to learn from that is, when they say to you, the building fell down. I mean, I never forget when he said to me, when I said to him, what do you see when you look at the stage? And he said, I see the park across the street in on Mercer Street. And I was like, there's no wall. And he goes, that's what I'm trying to tell you.
It's a hard thing to imagine in your head. It's
right.
Hey, you figure, a balcony fell off, a piece of the building. Yeah, people, they.
Yeah, because my first reaction was, well, listen, if a piece of the set fell down, don't worry about it. We have a carpenter; he'll fix it. We'll get it. He goes, no, you don't understand. There's no set.
Buildings.
So that was kind of an interesting experience early on in my career.
Holy cow! I'm going to start my story just after the divorce began. I'm going to refer to my notes here. So a lot of all these stories that I'm going to tell are interconnected, and everything kind of started with Scott Nimmerfro. And I never confronted Scott, but I always had a feeling that Scott's hands were on my back as I exited the Crypt group. But after a while, after our manager Alan Kassir fired me, this was after you had fired him. Then he kind of got stuck with the booby prize because basically I was unhireable. He would say to me, you got to write something. You got to write something. And I didn't have anything. And finally, after languishing for a bit, Nimmerfro hooked me up with a guy named Nick Mechanic. And Mechanic became my decade for an agent or so until his own problems kind of overwhelmed him. But when Nick was good, he was great. He worked at a place called The Agency for a guy named Jerry Zeitman. And Zeitman was one of Lou Wasserman's crew at MCA. And if Jerry would get a hold of you and he'd be able to tell you stories, they were amazing stories, but man, if he had nothing else to do, but frequently he had stuff to do. Among the junior agents at the agency was a guy named Vince Gerardis, who ended up selling Game of Thrones to HBO. Nick and Jerry were always at war with each other. I was at the agency one Friday afternoon. Nick wasn't there when Jerry, I forget what it was that got into his head, but Jerry fired him without Nick even being there. He said, he's fired, doesn't work here anymore. And I was scheduled to hang out with Nick that night. And Nick came over my house, and as he walked in my front door, he still was unaware of the fact that he had been fired. And wow. I broke it to him that he had been fired. And Nick actually, he laughed. He said, don't worry about it. And lo and behold, first thing by Monday morning, it was, he wasn't fired anymore. He was that way. Nick was, like I said, Nick was great. The fact that I got the Outer Limits was entirely Nick's doing. He made that happen. It was 2 great seasons as a co-executive VP on that show. It was really cool. We had Sam Egan, who was the showrunner, as our guest, and Sam had a whole other way of running shows, different from the way that we ran shows, and so I learned a ton. I really did. In Sam's system, what he wanted, if you were the responsible producer, whether you wrote the script or not, you were going to be on the set from the moment they opened business first thing in the morning until you were going to shut it down. Mm-hmm. So it was a whole other way of just being a producer, and so that was again stuff that I needed to learn, and so it was a great experience. The first script that I wrote was the first episode that I wrote, which was the first episode that we shot the first season that I was on, Outer Limits, was a ripoff of this first script I ever wrote that when I got to LA back in 1985. Mm-hmm. It was that it was I ripped off one piece, and that became that first episode. and they said the script turned out well, and they made it. There was even the first episode that we shot that season, and Richard, one of the company that produced it was called Trilogy, and it was John Watson, Penn Densham, and Richard Barton Lewis. Now it's interesting. If you go to, and Trilogy did things that they did a Robin Hood, they did The Outer Limits. They had another show called Poltergeist. They were a big company. They were a very big company. If you go to their website right now where they tell their story, Richard Barton Lewis never existed. He never existed. He's been wiped clean from everything. And though they are the producers, they claim Poltergeist is there, Richard Barton Lewis created that show. He doesn't exist anywhere in their story. It's funny. There was always animosity towards Richard Barton Lewis. Going between the first season and the second season I was on the show, there was an attempted coup at Trilogy, and they tried to get rid of Richard Barton Lewis. But Richard was really tight with John Symes, who ran Showtime at the time. And John Symes had kind of invented this idea where as he made he was trying to make Showtime competitive with HBO. And so he made all these firm 22 orders. And Trilogy was the recipient of quite a few of them. There was Outer Limits and Poltergeist. Those were years and years of firm 22s. I mean, think of, it was great business for Trilogy, but Symes and Richard Barton Lewis were really tight. And when the coup at the palace, when Richard Barton Lewis got on the phone to John Symes, and John Symes said to Trilogy, you're not kicking Richard out.
Wow.
The coup died. It happened on the first day that the writers were getting together for season 2. And it's funny, we were all sitting in a meeting waiting really for our executives to walk in and begin the meeting. And we were aware of the fact that there was a coup going on. And we didn't know who was going to walk in the door and tell us what to do. We had no idea who was going to be in charge at the company, whether the company, it was, and Mark Stern walked in, and we knew he was part of the coup, but he walked in, his tail between his legs, and Richard Barton Lewis behind him, and Richard sat down and said, begin the meeting, Mark. It was, wow. Oh my God, it was one of those, woo.
Well, I knew Penn quite well.
Huh.
And also, when you talk about the agency, I was represented by Larry Bexey.
Oh yeah,
who was one of the partners at the agency.
Sure.
And he's still a good friend today.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure there's all kinds of cross-pollination stories.
Yeah.
I had one run-in myself with Richard Lewis. I didn't Richard Barton Lewis, but just to distinguish him from the Richard Lewis that we worked with.
Right.
On that first episode, which was about this Howard Stern-like DJ. I wrote it but for a Dennis Leary kind of an energy. Richard Lewis cast the role for me. He never asked me who I thought would be the appropriate casting, and he cast Joey Pants. Now, hey, I love, Joey. We worked with Joey. Joey's lovely. He's terrific. Yeah. But Joey's got a very particular kind of laconic New Jersey energy.
Right.
It was not the way the script was written. And so really the casting was going to fight the way that the script was written. And we produced a show in Vancouver. Richard was, of course, in Los Angeles, and he got the first day's dailies, and I'm into shooting the second day, and I'm on set because that's where I have to be. And you got to go to your office. You got to talk to Richard. He's really angry. He wants to talk to you right now. Oh, what the fuck? So I go into my office, and Richard is livid about Joey's performance. Because Richard said, that's a great script. He is destroying your script. Why the fuck are you letting him wreck your script? And I said, Richard, and I guess my time with Joel was finally paying off. I finally, a bit of a spine showed up, and I said, Richard, I didn't cast Joey, you did. I said, I wrote it for a Dennis Leary type.
Yeah.
And you didn't ask me, you cast him. Now, sidebar, there was a reason that Richard cast Joey. and nothing to do with how he thought Joey would be, had nothing to do with the relation with the character, the script, but the actor. Joey had an interest in the Havana cigar room in Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
And Richard wanted, I don't know, he wanted a membership. I don't know. He wanted something.
Right.
And so he was hoping to parlay casting Joey into a favor.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I was aware of this. Someone had told me this, so I knew this. Now, I could not throw this at Richard. That would not have been good. But I said what I said. I said,
how did he react to you saying you cast him? You know, I wrote it for somebody else, but you cast it.
I said, look, and I said, you know, I am not going to go to my actor and tell him to act like some other actor. Mm-hmm. I said, that's going to destroy my relationship with him, and the actor will not do it. The actor will simply stop working and this episode will turn to absolute crap. I said, we have cast our lot. I said, look, in theater, you know, what I learned in theaters, casting is 90% of your decision making. Once you've made that decision, it is what it is. Mm-hmm. And I said, that is the case here. And I said, I have no problem with Joey's performance. It's not the way I wrote it, but it will work just fine. And I said, if you want to talk to Joey, if you have a problem with his performance and you think it's that important, then you must confront him directly. I will not do it. And I hung up. And I went back to the set, and I never said anything to Joey, and Richard never called Joey because Richard, of course, was a fucking coward. And, you know, the odd thing is Richard never bothered me ever again with anything. And he bothered people constantly. You know, right. Richard's on the phone was like, oh, fuck me, man. I never had a problem with Richard. In fact, in between seasons, you know, they would try to develop additional material, and they would bring me in, and I would work with Richard. He liked working with me because, yeah, I guess because I would stand up to him. I didn't have a problem.
It's a good lesson to learn as well for young producers or writers or directors. I mean, when you're in the right, you've got to say that. And when you're feeling something emotionally, you've got to express it.
Oh God, yes. Oh God, yes. You if you don't, you'll have someone tell you that your people skills are shit in front of a whole crew.
Oh no, you won't. That was already done.
You're next up.
Well, you know, I'm often asked about home movies. A movie I made with Brian De Palma. It's the first movie I ever made. And it's quite an interesting little tale. And every time I tell it, people are really quite amazed by it. I was teaching a class at Hunter College in play producing. And my attitude was, if you want to learn to produce a play, produce a play. Brian, unbeknownst to me, was teaching at Sarah Lawrence College. The same philosophy. If you want to learn to make a movie, make a movie. And we met socially. Jack Temshin, my partner, was friends with mutual friends of Brian's, and they met. And then Brian had this idea of merging the two classes because he was sick and tired of driving up to Sarah Lawrence from Manhattan once a week. And so he said, you know, why don't we merge the two classes and teach it in our home apartments and all day Saturday? And I was very skeptical because I thought, you know, the schools aren't going to allow that, but they did. And so we taught this class. We had about 15 students, and, you know, Brian came up with an outline for a script, and then we would assign, you know, you write scene 1, and then you write scene 2, and you write scene 3, and then they would write the script, and then we would read it out loud every Saturday, and then we would analyze it and critique it, and then we would say, okay, based on the critique, you wrote scene 1, well, you're going to rewrite scene 7. And you wrote scene 6, you're going to rewrite scene 3. And we would keep constantly doing that each week, talking about story, talking about character, talking about relationship. And in between, we would talk about, okay, how does one make a movie? What does a gaffer do? What does a grip do? How do you determine who should be the DP? And we did this for 2 semesters. And we enjoyed it. We had a lot of fun with it. And it was all day Saturday. And at the end, come May, we said to everyone, well, you know, that's the end of the class. And thank you very much. And they said, well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. You've been saying if you want to learn to make a movie, make a movie. Well, we've been working all season, 2 semesters on this script. We think the script isn't bad. So we want to make the movie. And we looked at each other and gulped really hard and said, oh, okay. Brian, how do we do this? And Brian said, well, let's raise $350,000 and we'll make the movie. And we'll shoot it on Sarah Lawrence campus and also in Manhattan. And we're like, oh, okay. So Brian, literally in about 48 hours, he raises his 175,000. He calls us up and he goes, listen, I got 25,000 from Steven. I go, who's Steven? Spielberg? Oh, that's Steven. And I got 25,000 from George. Who's George? Lucas? I went, oh. And I got $25,000 from Kirk. And I go, Kirk Douglas? And he goes, right, I just made The Fury with him. And I got the rest of the money from other notables like that. Where's your money? And of course, Jack and I at the time had, we're going to accountants and lawyers in Manhattan, trying to scrape 10,000 here and 10,000 there. Anyway, we raised our 175. He raised his 175. And we're now off to make this movie that we're producing for and with Brian. We're making it, our offices are on the Sarah Lawrence campus, which is a beautiful campus. But I'm in a production office in the summer with no air conditioning, and I have a cot. That's my home. I'm sleeping.
It's just north of New York City in Bronxville.
Bronxville, yeah. And it's hot. And I'm sleeping on a cot in the office. That's my home while we're shooting. So we finally prep. We get to the first day of shooting. Kirk Douglas comes into town. We put him up at the Dorset Hotel in Manhattan. I think it's on West 54th Street. And we bring him up the first day. And, we're all panicked and we're all frightened and it's going great. And we finish the day and we put Kirk in the car and our student driver drives him back to the hotel. And I'm now in the office with Jack and Brian having a beer, sweating our butts off. And the phone rings and my assistant comes in and he goes, Gil, I have a phone call for you. And I go, no, I don't want to take it now. I'm talking to Brian and Jack. No, you have to take it. It's Ken Kleinberg. And I go, Ken Kleinberg. Now, Ken Kleinberg was Kirk Douglas's attorney. Now, and I'm thinking to myself, why is Ken Kleinberg calling me? We finished the day's shoot. We drove Kirk back to the hotel. Why? He must have gotten on the phone right away with Ken Kleinberg. Something's really wrong. Oh my God, what am I going to say to Ken Kleinberg? So I get on the phone with Ken and he goes, so Gil, what did you do to my client? And I go, well, what did we do to your client? I thought we had a really good day. And he goes, well, that's a dog barking. Well, you had a good day, but why is my client calling me and saying to me, he wants to increase his investment from 25,000. He wants to double it. And I go, oh, so he had a good time. He had, good. Listen, Ken, I'm really sorry, but we set this up as a limited partnership and we've raised all the money and we've closed out the company. So there's no room for us to take $25,000. Tell Kirk, thank him very much. And there's this pause on the phone, which I'm sweating bullets. And Ken Kleinberg, to his credit, says to me, Gil, I don't think you've been doing this very long, have you? And he knows it's my first movie. I go, about a day. And he goes, yeah. So let me just give you some advice that I'd like you to think about. I mean, he's very sweet about it. He goes, if the star of your movie, who's a big motion picture star, calls you up after one day of shooting and says, I want to double my investment, as a good producer, I would think you would try to figure out a way to accommodate that actor. Do you hear what I'm trying to tell you? Now I'm totally soaking wet from sweat. And I go, right. Ken, could I call you back tomorrow? And he goes, that's a very good idea. Thank you. And I hung up. Brian's laughing his ass off at me. I had to call up our attorneys and our accountants and say, look, and tell them the situation and say, so therefore, I want to give you back $25,000 because I want to take Kirk Douglas's $25,000. And they graciously said, oh, of course, because they didn't want to give us any money in the first place. And that was one of my first lessons in producing movies. And I'll never forget Ken Kleinberg for that. And I've thought about all the times I've silently thanked him.
Now let me ask you a question. All those the guys to whom you gave back their investment, had they stayed in instead, what would have happened to their investment?
Oh, they made a lot of money. They would have made it because what we did with that movie, we made the movie, and before we finished the movie, because Kirk Douglas is in it and Vinnie Gardenia was in it, and because of Brian being pretty much a star as well, before we finished the movie. And they knew we made it for very little money. They didn't know it was $350,000. So they offered us $500,000 for a 7-year lease for domestic. This is United Artists. To which Brian came in one day and he said, we just got this offer. And I said, take it. What do you mean we got to talk about it? Take it. So we took that offer. And at the same time, we were talking to a foreign rep. I think it was called JAD. Jag or JAD? I think it was JAD, JAD Films. And they offered us $500,000 for foreign rights for 7 years. So on a $350,000 investment, we had $1 million and we hadn't finished shooting yet. So before we finished shooting, we returned double the money to all the investors.
The ones who stayed in.
The ones who stayed in, including Kirk Douglas, and including Lucas and Spielberg.
No,
they didn't call us to say anything. My attorneys called me and said, Gil, what are you doing? I said, what do you mean? I said, you're doing something very wrong and we need to help you out with this. There's no way you could give us back double our money and the picture hasn't even been completed yet. How are you doing this? And I explained it to them and they said, do you want money for another movie? And I said, not at the moment. I'm just trying to finish this one. And the movie did very well.
I'll pick up when I got back from Vancouver, in between seasons, Jerry Zeitman introduced me. What good agents do is they look for synergy between clients, and Jerry Zeitman did that. He introduced me to one of his clients, a guy named Tom Sullivan. And I don't know if you know who Tom was. Tom was he still is. He's still alive. A rather famous, prominent blind person. And Tom he'd been an actor and a singer. He'd been on Good Morning America for a couple of years. And he had written a book about, he'd written a couple of books, but he'd written a book about his early life called Adventures in Darkness. In Adventures, Tom writes about the summer he was 11 years old. Blind since birth, Tom was a student at Boston's famous Perkins School for the Blind, Helen Keller's alma mater. And one night, he and two of his friends escaped, and they got caught in the middle of Boston Harbor in a rowboat. And Tom got kicked out because he was the ringleader. And his father was he
got kicked out of the rowboat, or he got kicked out of the school?
He got kicked out of Perkins School for the Blind. Now he was sent back to Boston to live with his parents. His dad was a proud Irishman, larger than life kind of guy, and he was determined that his son was just you'll live as you live, whatever. The mom was determined to get him back into Perkins, and Tom was determined to live with the normies. He wanted to try to go to school there and be treated like a normal kid. And Adventures in Darkness is about the summer where his father was determined to break him and prove to him that he couldn't make it in the outside world. And so to demonstrate to him that he couldn't be like the normies, he got onto a Little League team. And he got it so that Tom was a pitcher. And Tom actually was physically skilled. And what Tom was able to do is if his father would with a catcher's mitt and would pound the catcher's mitt, Tom learned very quickly really to throw the ball towards the sound.
Right.
And so long as he kept hearing that sound, he would do it. And so he really figured it out, and his father got him used to it. His father worked with him, and after a while he got quite good. And when, he went and played in his first Little League game, Tom knew what he could do. His father and mother sitting in the stands knew what he could do, but the opposing batters had no idea that he could do that, and it was quite terrifying when a blind kid starts throwing that rock.
Right.
And the second kid that Tom faced was a bit of a bully, and he kept shouting at Tom, telling him that he was blind.
Mm-hmm.
And so Tom threw at his head.
And what happened?
And the bully went down, and there was a bit of a fight, and Tom's father rushed in, and they ended up having a boxing match scheduled for a week later.
Wow.
And that's the climax of the book and the story. When Tom and the bully went, 3 rounds in a boxing match, and Tom got the shit beat out of him for 2 rounds because he was trying to wait for the bully to tire, but also to figure out where he was, just to get used to that sound. And once he zoned in on the bully, once in the early part of the 3rd round, he finally figured it out. Uppercut, man, took him right to the chin, put him on the ground. He was out for 5 minutes.
Wow. What was the name of the book?
Adventures in Darkness.
See, that's the mistake they made. They should have called it Coda, and they would have won an Academy Award.
Yeah, there you go. Adventures in Darkness. Anyway. So,
and where is he today? Is he still with us?
Yeah. Tom's still with us, and I actually working with Tom was great fun. It was. Tom skis, he golfs, and he was a huge, but might still be, I don't know, a Laker fan. And during the Kobe Shaq days, we would talk about Laker games, and he would go to Laker games, and you would listen to him talk about Laker games, and his visual sense of it. He really understood what was happening, and oh my God, it was frightening how he understood aspects of that game that he could not see. We ultimately set up Adventures in Darkness at Crusader. God, there was the guy who used to own the Staples Center. What was his name? Really conservative guy who had a film company called Crusader Entertainment. And they took it up. The Baldwins, Karen Baldwin.
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah.
Was it Richard Baldwin? I forget what it did. But Karen and I forget his name, but yeah, the
and
Baldwins.
Husband,
yeah. They were the producers. We attached Martha Coolidge.
Wow.
I went to a bunch of meetings out at Martha's house, way out in horse country. And there was one last hurdle. It was the casting of the kid to play Tom. And there was one actor everyone was convinced that we had to get, and we didn't get, and it was Freddie Highmore.
Wow.
And I don't quite remember why we didn't get him. I think it had to do with scheduling more than anything else. His schedule was tight, and he was a kid. So that made his schedule even tighter. And I think one day it just came where Martha just walked out, and then the Baldwins threw in the towel, and the next thing you know, it was all over.
Wow. But how did he become blind?
When he was born, there was a difficult birth, and his brain was deprived of oxygen for a couple of minutes, and something in that territory. So he was blind at birth. We ended up continuing. We became friends, and we ended up working on a couple other projects together. Tom, everyone's perception of Tom was he was just the nicest guy on the planet, and he was this really nice blind guy. And he was like, hey, our experience on Crypt, we know a lot of those people, they want to be bad. Yeah. And Tom wanted to be bad in the worst way. And so he wanted to write a thriller where there was a blind character, and the blind character, everyone thought they were good, but they were bad. And that's what we did. We did this thing, was called Blind Spot. It's about this cop with issues, and he falls for this attractive blind woman we realize at the last second, oh my God, she's the villain. She's been the villain of the whole. Right. Anyway, so we wrote that. We ultimately got Alan Rudolph attached to direct it.
Mhm.
We got Mary Allo attached as producer, and it was just trying to cast the blind woman, and we were trying to cast the blind woman, and right suddenly we were running up against the Writers Guild strike, and the one in the one before this one,
Yeah.
and we just couldn't get it cast before then, and then the strike hit, and by the time the strike ended, nobody gave a shit about that project
Wow.
anymore. A terrible way to die. But there was one other project that kind of Tom got me into. Tom, one person who really wanted to get Adventures made was a guy named Roger Harrison.
Mhm.
And Roger was really interesting. He was this guy from Arkansas, a Clinton hater from Arkansas,
Mhm.
real right-wing politics, but he had great taste in material. He had this idea for a story. He also did a bunch of theater pieces that were really interesting. Roger developed and produced a great little musical about Louis Prima and Keely Smith called Louis and Keely Live at the Sahara. He wanted to do the story. This thing ultimately became Cousins, a script I worked on that Roger, and he found money and paid for the development of the script. Really cool idea. Still out there. True story. There were three first cousins born within about 9 months of each other, 1935, Faraday, Louisiana. And these three cousins grew up in a swirling gumbo pot of fire-breathing religion, assemblies of God, that kind of stuff. The music,
Mhm.
and the music coming from the Delta, from the Ozarks,
Yeah, Zydeco.
the religious music. I mean, wow, so much music, and of course the family dynamics you can only have, especially in that part of the world. And the three cousins, one became Mickey Gilley, the country
Oh,
singer.
wow.
Another became Jerry Lee Lewis, and the other became Jimmy Swaggart.
Wow.
And they're all first cousins. And Jimmy Swaggart and Jerry Lee Lewis were first cousins on their mother's and their father's side.
Wow.
And those two guys were flip sides of the same fucked up coin. And Mickey Gilley was this lovely, lovely man who stood between these two first cousins who he loved so much, and he could not get them together after a certain point.
Mhm.
Because of certain things that happened in their history, having
Yeah.
to do with Jerry Lee. When Jerry Lee's fame suddenly hit a bump because of the fact that he married his cousin,
Right.
Jimmy Swaggart did not have his back. Did not. In fact, he preached against him.
I was going to say, he probably attacked him.
Yeah. He did, and then these two guys envied each other in a really twisted way. Jimmy, man, and Jimmy I really want to tell his story more than the other two, because from the time he was 5 years old, he was told, "You're going to be a preacher. You're going to be a preacher." Never allowed to have a childhood, and just grew up a man with so much conflict inside him. All three cousins were incredible boogie woogie piano players, and they played a lot. They did a lot of talent shows and contests together. And eventually Jerry Lee just blew them all out. But Jimmy Swaggart always envied Jerry his fame, his rock and roll fame, because Jimmy always wanted a piece of that, but he was never allowed to want it.
Right.
Jerry Lee always envied Jimmy's relationship with God, because Jerry's story was that where his particular talent came from. He always told this story about when he was 6 years old, he and a sharecropper's kid were playing outside the sharecropper's kid shack, and playing in the sharecropper's window was an old Victrola with Robert Johnson's Terraplane Blues playing.
Mhm.
And he always said that he kind of stopped dead, and he said, "What is that?" And the little sharecropper's kid said, "Oh, that's Robert Johnson. My daddy said he was, sings like that because he sold his soul to the devil."
Yeah.
And Jerry Lee Lewis always said in that moment, he said, "Well, I'm going to do that too."
Mm.
And he always, in his own head, he sold his soul to the devil, so he could never have that relationship that Jimmy had with God. And so he always kind of envied it. And these two men walked around envying each other. And then later in Jimmy Swaggart's life, when he became an incredibly successful televangelist, incredibly
Right.
successful, one of the
Yeah.
most successful, got caught in
Right.
a cheap motel outside of New Orleans, just watching a hooker, and just watching her get undressed. That's all he wanted to do. But
You can't do that as an evangelist.
no, you can't. And he fell from grace. And when that happened, Jerry Lee did not have his back either.
It's amazing to think that those three guys were related.
Yeah. When I was working on that project, I spent a weekend in Henderson, Nevada.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was appearing at one of the casinos over the weekend. And so I was invited to, they paid for a room, and I spent a day walking around with Mickey and interviewing Mickey, and Mickey was lovely. What a lovely day. And yeah, Phil gave me lots of amazing insights into that relationship between his two cousins, and
Wow.
and what Roger Harrison wanted to do at the end of the whole story was to have the three of them reunited on stage playing Boogie Woogie together, in front of a huge audience. That was his dream. That never came to pass, alas.
Right.
For a little while, we had Billy Bob Thornton attached to direct and play one of the parts. We just could never seem to get it past a certain point, and in the end, like so many good projects, it just died.
I wonder if one of these, I don't know if they're evangelical or these companies now that are doing religious movies, if they would see any value in promoting something like that with some point of view from the religion.
I think it's a great American story, and I still think it's worth telling. Just something from an outside perspective. I think actually the way that I want to do it, I would do it as a podcast first. And I just tell the story of these three cousins and the music and the environment. And really it's just telling a story about America and this conflicting thing that happened, over 3, 4, 5 episodes, limited series. And you just fill it with a lot of music, a lot of its roots. It's license. It won't cost you anything. It's in the public domain.
Yep.
And it's all incredible. So you can carpet it with incredible sound, and you could recreate a lot of the environments and bring their world to life, telling the story of what happened. And then I would do it as a limited run TV series, but based on the podcast. I think
that's a good idea, especially when you think about them just as, forget everything else, which makes it even more delicious. But just in terms of the three men and the relationship to each other, and how they reacted and related to each other, that we don't even know about.
Right.
Most people don't even know about that. That to me would be rather compelling.
It's just sitting there waiting to be plucked, and now we've given it away. But actually, there's a script written. There's all kinds of stuff. But that script doesn't have to be. It wouldn't be what this is going forward. This would be a whole new way to tell this story. Anyway,
on a lighter note, after making home movies, I got involved with a group that was making a movie on the comic strip Brenda Starr. And the guys who produced Annie on Broadway and at the time owned the 46th Street Theater were producing it. And Sid Finger, who I know, who was an accountant who sort of had a monopoly on motion picture and television industry, recommended me to be a producer for them. And so they were in this.
You told the story of working for Sid in episode 1 of our podcast, in our very, very first episode, where you learned accounting, film accounting from him.
Yeah, right. So now I'm producing this Brenda Starr with these guys, and it's being financed by a guy named Jake Eberts and a company called Goldcrest, which became a huge company.
Sure.
And a guy named Jake Eberts, who had a company. And a guy named Joe Childs from America, and they were partners, and they were financing the picture. And so one day they said, well, and they had just made Gandhi. They financed Gandhi. And they said they wanted us to have a meeting with them And so we might as well come for the opening of Gandhi in London. And so they put us up at the Dorchester, and we flew over on the Concorde, which I'd never done before. And here I am,
How was that?
fast. You can see the curvature of the earth.
Huh.
And it's really, you have no idea how fast you're going, except for you're looking at this thing that says Mach 1, and then it goes Mach 2. And then a voice comes on and says, we're now at the highest speed we'll be going. It was amazing. 3 hours, and we're there. New York to London. Anyway, or to Paris. So we go to London, and we're at the Dorchester, and we're invited to lunch. And I figured it's just going to be, my two partners and from New York who flew over, and Jake and Joe. But there's another fellow sitting there, and they sit me right next to this other fellow. And I'm looking at this guy, and I'm like, I think that looks like Richard Attenborough. Now, Richard Attenborough directed Gandhi, and he's a very fine actor. And I'm sitting right next to this guy. So I look at him, and he goes, hello, my name is Richard Attenborough.
Like he has to introduce himself.
Right.
Surely you don't know who I am.
So I go, oh, nice to meet you. My name is Gil Adler. I said, so nice to meet you, Sir Richard. And my name is Gil Adler. And he goes, oh, no. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that's my name. And he goes, no, you can't call me that. Please don't call me Sir Richard. No one calls me Sir Richard. I said, oh, I'm sorry. He said, no need to be sorry. I said, so should I just call you Richard? No. You must call me what my friends call me, because we're having lunch together and now you're my friend. You must call me Dickie. So I paused for a second, not sure if he was putting me on or not. And I said, Dickie? And I think my voice cracked, and he said, yes, call me Dickie.
Now, you did not know that everybody called him Dickie. You didn't actually
I didn't know that.
You didn't know
No.
that he was not putting you on. He was actually saying.
No, I had no idea.
He was actually being really genuinely and generous.
Oh, yeah. And so I looked at him and I said, I don't think I can do that. And he laughed, and he slapped me on the back. He said, oh, yes, my dear boy, you'll do that. You'll do that. You'll call me Dickie, or you won't call me anything. And I said, and I looked around the table to see if he was putting me on, and everyone was looking at it like, this is a nice guy. So I called him Dickie. I had a hard time doing it, but I would call him Dickie, and we had a great conversation.
But wasn't his circle of friends called the Lovies?
Yeah, that's right. And so I didn't see him for many years, and I met him at the Academy Awards one year. I went to the Academy Awards, which is a whole other story. It's not nearly what everyone thinks it is, but that's for another time. And I'm standing at the bar, because when they break for commercial, everyone runs out to the bar and gets a drink, and they stay out there as long as they can until they're ushered back in. And so I'm out there, and this man taps me on the shoulder, and he goes, my dear boy, Gilbert, how are you? I haven't seen you for years. I looked at him and I said, oh, sir. And I caught myself, and I could see his look. And I said, sir, oh, Dickie, how are you? Nice to see you. And we sat there and stood out at the bar, had a drink, and then we were ushered back to our seats. But it was a real interesting relationship that I had with Dickie, and he was great. He was just the nicest man in the world. I could talk to him about anything. He would be there and willing to listen and willing to give me advice. Really sweet man.
He certainly seemed that way.
Yeah, he was. And it was funny because I loved him in a movie that he did for Fox years earlier about oh God, what was it with the God, we're gonna have to drop this in later. It was Candice Bergen and the guy who was in the motorcycle guy, who big actor.
Fonda?
No, like that though. He was in The Great Escape.
Oh, Steve McQueen.
And this was a thing about the Chinese and blocking the river near China.
Oh yeah, the sand pebbles.
Sand pebbles.
The sand pebbles. Yeah.
Yeah, which I loved. I loved that movie, and I loved him in it. And here I am years later meeting
Oh, you meaning Dickie from the Sand Pebbles?
Right, right.
Oh, sure, sure. Oh, well, yeah. Well, that is one of the remarkable things about not just the business, but our our path through the business. We've gotten to not just work with, but to meet and work with. Well, I guess
Yeah, yeah.
but to meet and work with. But working with him is really the highest part of the
Well,
pleasure.
I'll give you another story about when I was making Superman Returns in Australia, and I was exhausted on the weekends. I would just sort of sleep the whole weekend. My wife, after a while, got sick of it and said, "No, we're going out." And there's a documentary series festival, and we're going to see that. And I figured, oh, that's good. It's air conditioned, and I can fall asleep. So we go to this festival, and they're playing this documentary, and it's about Poland, and about the Jewish population in Poland. And all of a sudden, I'm sort of half asleep, and they introduce the chief rabbi of Poland. And I start hearing him speak, and he's speaking with a Brooklyn accent. And I'm like, what? What is this? Is this a joke? And I wake up, and I see that this young man is speaking with a huge Polish accent. His name was Michael Sheldrick. And so I listened to the rest of the documentary, and it was really interesting because he was a guy from Brooklyn who lived on West End Avenue. He became a rabbi, and he applied for the job. He heard about that Poland was looking for a chief rabbi, and he just applied for it, and he got it.
Like Craigslist?
I don't know what it was, but he applied for it, he got it. So I'm looking at this I look at my wife, and I said, Jeannie, if we ever find ourselves in that part of the world, I would really like to meet this guy. And so 2 years later, I find myself in Berlin making Valkyrie. And I said to my assistant, listen, I don't know if you can find this guy. His name is Michael Sheldrick. And he's the chief rabbi, or he was the chief rabbi of Poland. If you could track him down, I would love to talk to him. He's not going to know who I am, but I would love to talk to him. So sure enough, he finds him, gets him on the phone. And I introduce myself, and I say to him how I know him from this documentary. And he goes, oh, yeah, I remember that. And we have a chat. And I said, I would love to meet you. And he said, well, I would love to meet you as well. Why don't you come to Poland, to Warsaw, as my guest? And in 3 weeks, there's a double bar mitzvah that I'm officiating over. I'd like to invite you to the bar mitzvah. So I'm like, wow, I'm going to go to a bar mitzvah in Poland? Holy crap. So we go. And I say to my assistant, do I need to fly there? Can we drive there? How far of a? And he goes, well, it's only a few hours. I go, well, maybe you'll come with us, and, you want to go to Poland and you'll drive us? And he goes, yeah. So we get on the road, and we're driving 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. I'm like, where is Poland? Did they move it? And he goes, it's just taking longer. I miscalculated. It took about 5 or 6 hours to get to Poland. And we get there, and we meet the rabbi. And he's this young guy. He's like 35 years old. He is from Brooklyn. Sounds like he's from Brooklyn. Really nice guy. And we had the delightful weekend with him. And we've remained friends all these years. So I go back to Berlin, and I'm thinking to myself, gee, I guess if there's a chief rabbi in Poland, I guess there's a chief rabbi in Berlin. So I look up chief rabbi in Berlin, and sure enough, there is a guy. And we called him up, and his name was oh God, I have to. We'll drop it in later. I'll give it to you.
Yeah.
Rosenzweig, something like that. And
Rosenzweig.
Yeah. And he goes, oh yeah, I'd like to meet you. In fact, I'd like to show you a new temple that was built by the government. And I said, oh, is it in West Berlin? No, it's in East Berlin. I said, oh, so will we go on a Saturday? And he goes, no, nobody goes there on Saturday. And I'm thinking to myself, nobody goes to the Jewish synagogue on Saturday? And he goes, I'll explain to you when I meet you. And so we meet him in the daytime. He's got a long black beard. He's got the big hat, long coat, very, very orthodox.
Looks the part.
And takes us to this gorgeous, modern building. And he says, the government spent $6 million making this synagogue. Unfortunately, and it's on the site where Hitler destroyed a synagogue, and made it into a stable for horses, the synagogue. And after the war, they destroyed all of that, and the government decided to put up a huge synagogue. Unfortunately, Jews don't live in that neighborhood any longer. So the building is sort of empty, and it was sort of a waste of money. But it was a gorgeous, gorgeous place. And we're sitting there, we're talking, and the rabbi looks at me and he goes, so you're a big producer of this movie, huh? I said, well, I'm one of the producers on the movie, yeah. He goes, so how much money would you like to give me as a donation? And I said, oh, well, I hadn't thought about that. Let me think about that. And we left. And you know, that was the end of that conversation. But it made me think about, in the career that you have, you never really think about the people that you meet or the places that you're going to go to or see. And over the years, I've become friends with the King of Jordan and the Prince Ali of Jordan and the King Abdullah, I'm sorry, King Mohammed of Morocco, all because of this business. And it's just amazing because the friendships last. You know, it hasn't happened in recent years, but for a while after we made Valkyrie, I would get a call from Prince Ali or his office saying that he was going to be in Los Angeles with his brother, and would I have time for dinner? Well, that meant to me, Prince Ali, his brother is the King, Abdullah. They're asking me if I could meet them at the Beverly Hills Hotel and have dinner. And I'm like, I think I can make that happen. Yeah. And for a while, we were friends. You know, we kept in contact. And then, of course, like everything else in this business, you get involved in other things and you distance yourself from people, and it goes away. And occasionally, years later, as quite often happens, you'll run into somebody and it's like you haven't spoken to them in 10 minutes. But it's really interesting to be involved with, you know, in a business where that's sort of a byproduct of what you do. And you don't really think about it.
True. And I think of the people that we are yet to meet, you and I, as we continue forward, because there's so many lines in the water already.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to rule out chief rabbis if it's okay with you.
No worries.
I've seen enough of them
for a lifetime.
Yeah.
This has been incredible fun. Just like I said, swapping stories we mostly hadn't heard. Really hadn't heard about each other from each other. Wow.
And for the next time, I think we'll talk about the first play that I produced, El Grande de Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
And before that, how I met Joe Papp and Bernie Gersten and became friendly with them.
Yeah, because there's a lot of great stuff there too. Hey, I guess we'll have to have a sequel.
Maybe we will.
We'll bring up some more bodies. Until then, we'll see you next time, everybody. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative